This is the U.S. men's national team set to defend their Nations League title and qualify for the Copa America happening next summer. But standing in their way is a team that crushed their dreams going into the 2018 World Cup, Trinidad and Tobago. It's been 6 long years since that game in Cuba, but a lot has changed. Things can still go wrong though. A home and away playoff against a Caribbean nation, and Gregg Berhalter's first competitive matches since being rehired for the U.S. national team coach. In this episode of It's Called Soccer, you'll learn how Gregg Berhalter's roster selection has evolved since he's become Gregg Berhalter Phase 2, why Miles Robinson is in this roster while Mark McKenzie, John Brooks, and Austin Trusty are out, and the starting 11 that we should absolutely go with to get the job done against Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Jake Landau, and this is It's Called Soccer. Talk to me a little bit about this roster construction and the way that you're seeing Gregg Berhalter evolve, or maybe evolve isn't the right word. If it's not positive, I don't know what you have to say it. But at least what is he changing from Gregg Berhalter 1 to Gregg Berhalter 2?
I feel like this Gregg Berhalter has a lot more of an established idea of what his depth chart is. And I think we can get into what that depth chart looks like for him and how our views might differ. But the depth chart is very clear. We have seen, maybe 30 total players called up over 3 windows. There's one new name on this roster, and that's Paxton Aronson. Everyone else has already been called in one of the last 2 windows. Well, you go back to 2019, 2020, 2021, it seemed like we were calling in like 100 players a year, if not more, and giving, 60 to 100 players new caps. And that's just not the Berhalter we're seeing anymore. It feels like Berhalter has used the lessons he learned from the first cycle to trim down the size of the pool to a much more streamlined group. I don't know if you feel the same way, but every single time I look at this roster, I feel like it's like, okay, cool, we know who his guys are right now. This is the team.
Yeah, and Paxton Aronson, actually, I think he was called in with BJ Callahan, the window right after the World Cup, after Gregg Berhalter had left the team because his contract ran out. So Paxton is, even then, even if he hasn't been part of the 30 that Gregg called in, he has been with the U.S. camp since the World Cup happened last winter. So that is interesting you talk about that, because I don't know necessarily, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. I don't necessarily know if this is a Gregg Berhalter thing or if this is a consolidation of talent for the U.S. where maybe our center backs aren't a good example, but it does seem like the pack is kind of running away with their positions, and within the depth chart, at least, we know if we had a healthy midfield to be Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and maybe Yunus Musa, maybe Gio Reyna, depending on how Gregg wants to play. But we kind of know who our best 11 is, who our best 15 are, who the subs would be, depending on the situation. It just feels like we have a more solidified situation with each position and kind of who's the next up. Do you agree with that?
I feel like we do. I feel like you're seeing that play out even in club situations in Europe. They're just very obvious guys who are playing better than everyone else at their positions. And even the MLS contingent, there's not been as many standout kids who feel like they're knocking on the door to sort of get their chance. With Pulisic and Weah going down this window, you would think that this would be the window, call up some kid who's killing it in MLS at the wing. But Cade Cowell had a horrific season, and there's not been really any other names that have jumped out as me as we need to see them right now. Or we thought Taylor Booth was knocking on the door of being a regular, and he's been terrible this year. And so it opens the doors for this pack to kind of run away. So yeah, it feels like the group who is sort of getting called in is the group that just, it's obvious. You could hardly construct a roster without this group. So yeah. I feel like that's a good shout.
Miles Robinson is the only MLS player on this roster, actually. And he's one of the players where you could make it an argument that Mark McKenzie or John Brooks or Austin Trusty maybe deserve a spot over him. So it does feel like that consolidation of power into the 23 that are being called in. You also mentioned the wingers, the 3 injured players that presumably would make this roster that are not with the team right now are Christian Pulisic, Timothy Weah, and Tyler Adams. So there's 2 wingers that we could essentially bring in extra, which is why you mentioned Cade Cowell. I would argue that the next winger that we should bring in is Luca Koleosho, who's eligible for 3 different nations, the US, Canada, and Italy. He's playing at Burnley for Vincent Company. And like, it's not, I think we've reached the point now where the next best player in some position is probably not the best player of their age in Major League Soccer. It's actually Gagas Slanina at UPenn, who's going to be the third goalkeeper. It's Luca Koleosho, who is, we're probably trying to call him up, to be fair. Like Gregg Berhalter did say again in the press conference, he's in constant contact with him. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it feels like the next best thing in each position is now like the who's on the fringes in Europe rather than who's the best of the bunch in Major League Soccer.
Yeah, I feel like if you're calling someone from MLS, you're trying to give them a chance to impress to go abroad at this point. And I feel like the MLS playoffs are doing that well enough for almost everyone, except, Miles Robinson's an exception to that because I feel like he's the only one who's going to walk into the starting. He's gone. He's effectively gone. And also, he's the only one who's going to walk into the starting 11 of wherever he goes. Like, he's going to start in Europe somewhere in a month. It's just a question of where and what caliber team wants him. So you give him the national team windows to basically showcase what he can do against higher level competition.
Although I will say in the game that Atlanta United won at home against Columbus, he did get beat by a really nice first touch by Columbus, but Miles Robinson was at fault for that goal.
Yes, but you noticed that Cucho Hernandez was about to throw a fit by the end of the game because he was getting locked down the whole second half. Miles had a pretty good game with one notable blunder. So he wallpapers over a lot of issues for that team. I think that's
the problem with defenders, right? Yeah. Is like if you make one mistake in the game, but you have a lockdown 89 minutes, a random podcaster is going to call out that one mistake.
Yeah. No, I've spent all year like screaming about how awful their midfield is, and I think that the numbers show that they're like plus 1.5 goals against better when Miles Robinson's on the field than without. So like, there's a lot. He gets beat occasionally because the midfield gets cooked in front of him, and he has to make a huge play and can't. But most of the time, it's him putting out fires for the horrific midfield that they put in front of him. So I watch a lot of Atlanta, and I'm really opinionated on Miles Robinson compared to most.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would trust that opinion, and I did watch the game. Atlanta pretty much had the upper hand for a lot of that game. Real quick, Tom, before we go to the rest of the roster, I want your opinion on tonight's game, the deciding rubber match between Columbus Crew at home taking on Atlanta United. Who wins that one?
It's hard to, I would love to say Atlanta, but it's hard to bet against Columbus Crew at home this year where they've basically been unbeatable. So we'll see how they do. If they win the game, it's going to be Mayumba having a really good game in the midfield. It's going to be Almada cooking and, playing well in transition. It's going to be Robinson shutting down Cucho Hernandez, and it's going to be Giakoumakis scoring goals. So if that doesn't happen, then Columbus runs away with it, but there's a path. So we'll see.
But Tom, so we talked about Gagas Slanina being the third goalkeeper. The other two that round out that position are Matt Turner and Ethan Horvath, both at Nottingham Forest. Matt Turner is now kind of on that second string bench. He hasn't started for Nottingham Forest for the last two games, although Forest did get beat 3-2 today by West Ham. I went into the stats, and the Forest keeper that took Matt Turner's place, he gave up 3 goals on 1.3 expected Gs. So it's looking up for Matt Turner and all the U.S. fans for him getting back into the lineup. But let's talk about the center backs. So we're bringing 4 center backs with us. It's Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Miles Robinson, and Cameron Carter-Vickers from Celtic. The 3 that Gregg Berhalter mentioned in the press conference that he was, this was a difficult position to decide on this roster for. There were lots of people that deserved the call-up. The other 3 were Austin Trusty, who has been starting at Sheffield United over the last few games. There is Mark McKenzie, who has been playing incredibly well for Genk in Belgium and Europe. And then there's John Brooks. Johnny Brooks, who has been on the outs, and everyone thinks that this is, there's something personal between John Brooks and Gregg Berhalter. John Brooks has not been mentioned by U.S. Soccer, Gregg Berhalter, for the last 2 years, I would say. Going so far as to not be included on some of the weekend rosters that U.S. Soccer releases before each weekend of club matches. So, Tom, what did you take from who we're bringing with the center back core, and then the three that Gregg Berhalter mentioned as kind of being on the last three out of this roster?
I kind of feel like Austin Trusty is the name that's next up in line. Brooks, I've well known not I've been pretty vocal in the past about not really seeing what Brooks brings to the pool right now, especially with how good Tim Ream has been. I feel like if Tim Ream starts to drop off, then you maybe start looking at Brooks as being the heir
We
apparent to
only
that
need
position.
one 57-year-old
Yeah,
on the team.
exactly. You need a guy who's old and kind of slow and hits a really good pass, but Tim Ream kind of fills that void right now and playing at a little bit higher level. I feel like John Brooks is a guy you have to basically build your whole scheme around. He's just got such. He's really a good center back with one glaring liability, and that's that he's slow as dirt. Um, and if you have him step up, you have to basically have the whole team defend for him while he gets back in position. So personally, I would rather scheme around other players who I think are better players in other areas of the field rather than have to, rely on John Brooks, scheming around John Brooks to protect him. So personally, for me, he's on the outs just because of that glaring weakness in his game. But I think Austin Trusty is a name that is really interesting going forward. Starting for Sheffield United now, he's a left-footed left center back. It's a pretty rare combination. He's playing in the Premier League. It just really feels like his rise means he should probably start to get more looks with the national team and probably start to earn minutes for him.
He has one of the weirdest roads to the national team and to professional football that I've seen in a long time. I mean, Philadelphia Union to Colorado Rapids to being a chess piece slash poker chip for the Kroenkes to sell to Arsenal, who loaned him to Birmingham City. He's the player of the year in the championship at Birmingham City, and now he's at Sheffield United. He's won over the center back spot. There's been some injuries. There's been some red card suspensions, but man, what a world we live in that Austin Trusty over the last 2 years has built himself a case to be one of these four that we bring. So what is the case then? What is Gregg Berhalter thinking about? Why bring Cameron Carter-Vickers, Chris Richards, Tim Ream, and Miles Robinson? Is it, the way I see it is we want to play aggressive. We want to play a high line, especially against Trinidad and Tobago. We're probably not going to have a pure six. Like, we don't necessarily need Johnny to be in that spot holding the space between the defensive line and the midfield. So maybe Miles Robinson gives us a lot of speed and athleticism, the ability to stop counterattacks that way. Especially if we do play with Tim Ream, we're probably going to need someone to cover a lot of that space. Is that the thinking here, or why isn't Austin Trusty or Mark McKenzie with the team?
I don't know what Berhalter's thinking is. I feel like Berhalter is really high on Miles Robinson. Just in general, has always been really high on Miles Robinson. If he wasn't hurt, I feel like Miles Robinson probably starts at the World Cup for us. And I'm, especially with Richards having been out, I feel like Walker Zimmerman was always seen as like Miles Robinson light. And now that he's back, that just sort of seems to be the guy that Berhalter is going with. He's big, he's strong, he's athletic, he's ridiculously fast for a center back. And then Cameron Carter-Vickers feels like he's being groomed for like center back leadership going forward. I don't know if that's sort of fair to say, but he's played excellent for Celtic for the last few years. He's got World Cup experience. He's a player who's been at a lot of different places in Europe. It just sort of feels like Berhalter sort of likes what he brings, and then Ream and Richards are kind of obvious at this point. So yeah, I think that's what you see. McKenzie hasn't been playing a whole lot lately. He's had a few matches on the bench. He's kind of seen a dip in form for Genk lately. Trusty is just sort of finding his footing, finding his form. Maybe you give him a few more months to solidify that position and then call him up in March. But yeah, that's all I got right now.
And then we have Serginho Desta right back, and presumably Joe Scally is the backup there. Serginho Desta, interestingly enough, for PSV, who are now 12-0-0 in the Dutch Eredivisie, could potentially be Miles Robinson's next team, by the way. Serginho Desta has been mostly playing on the left side of the defense as a left back and a left wing back. But presumably for the US, because we have Jedi who can only play on the left, Serginho will be on the right. Joe Scally is going to be a backup to one of these two. And then we have Christopher Lund, who is returning to us, a Palermo player in the second division in Italy. He did really well with his time, I thought, in our recent exhibition matches. So I'm excited to see him back. But I mean, we have to think that Serginho Dest and Anthony Robinson are the starters on this team, right?
Yeah, I think that Lund has kind of solidified himself as the backup. I kind of have DeJuan Jones as maybe pushing for that backup spot, but it really just seems like Lund is he loved in camp, a really great like guy, always smiling, has done really well in his minutes. It seems like it's his job to lose until at least after the Olympics when you start to see Caleb Wiley, who I think is gone this winter too from MLS on another tangent, but maybe start to push him for that backup spot.
And I think DeJuan Jones probably has a mark to make in Europe as well. Although
Yeah.
I think he's 25 or 26 at this point. So
Yeah,
this might be one of the last times.
his window's closing, but I do think that he could actually do it. He's looked great for years for New England Revolution, and I've liked seeing him play whenever he does get a U.S. call-up. So there's some names out there finally. This is the first time we actually have names at the left back spot that I'm actually not terrified of.
Yeah. Where we're not saying maybe Serginho should play out of position or maybe Joe Scally should play out of position. It is nice to have a natural left back to back up Anthony Robinson. All right, then going to the midfield, we have Leonard Maloney coming to his second camp from Heidenheim in Germany. And Johnny is presumably going to be the starting six, although I don't necessarily even know if we play with the six in these games. We'll get to our starting 11s in a few minutes. Like I said before, we're going to be playing against a team where we will have a lot of possession. I don't necessarily know if we'll want a center defensive midfielder that's a pure six to break up plays. We might want to play with a double pivot of maybe Yunus Musa and Weston McKennie with Gio Reyna in front of them. But we are bringing two center defensive midfielders, players that play a little bit deeper in Johnny Cardoso and Leonard Maloney. Johnny is rumored to be being sold to Real Betis in La Liga in the winter window. So we could have another American abroad in the top 5 leagues, which would be amazing. And I mean, like Christian Pulisic, you mentioned Christopher Pulisic, doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. Pulisic and Weah are a short-term injury, but Tyler Adams had surgery on his hamstring recently. He's going to be out for the foreseeable future, and he has been out for the recent future as well. Tom, when you look at the near-term future of this team before Tyler Adams gets back healthy, is it just going to be better no matter who we play, whether it's Trinidad and Tobago or, Ghana and Germany, that we don't play with the six and we just get our best 11 on the field? Or is it still really important for us, do you think, to find that six backup to Tyler Adams?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, especially considering we're at the last national team window of the year. So we don't have a window in December. We have presumably Camp Cupcake in January. There's no February window. So we have 3 months without a window. And you almost feel like this is a time to get healthy and just worry about qualification. I almost would rather see us play without a six, at least until we're up so many goals that it just doesn't matter anymore, which I assume will happen at some point in both of these games. But I do like giving Johnny and Maloney more minutes just to see what they can do. If we are going to run with Johnny, I would rather see him in the double pivot just to see what he can do as an 8 more than a 6, because I think his skills translate there a little better than Maloney's.
I mean, he's got the Brazilian flair. He can, turn on a dime. And although he is a defensive player, he's still got that ability to connect the defense and attack. So then we go into the other midfielders. We basically know everyone in this midfield except for Paxton Aronson, who we've seen once with the national team, and not when Brendan Aronson, his brother, was with the team. So, Tom, what do you make of this midfield that is rounded out by Luca De La Torre, Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Gio Reyna, and Malik Tillman also listed as midfielders?
I can't help but really like this group. You have your solidified 8s. You have McKennie, you have De La Torre, you have Musa. I think Musa and McKennie are preferred, with De La Torre is probably, first off the bench for whoever of them's coming out. You have Reyna's probably your starting central attacker, with Tillman kind of is his number one backup. Although, I'd be interested to see what Tillman does on the wing this window. I don't know about you. I feel like this is the window to try it.
Let's talk about that, because the 2 players that are out with short-term injuries are wingers.
We can keep coming back to this.
Our other wingers are Brendan Aronson, who is in horrible form. I would almost say Kevin Paredes, to me, is ahead of him on my personal depth chart in terms of starting 11. Like, it's very possible that we could go into this game starting Kevin Paredes and Brendan Aronson on the wings, or Alex Zendejas, who has been scoring a lot in Mexico, but he was horrible. Like, probably one of the worst players that I've seen on the U.S. for 3 or 4 years. And like, I say that not to put a spotlight on him, because he's obviously shown with his club team that that's not who he is. Like, we need to get uncomfortable. We need that type of player. We need someone with a deadly left foot in our attack. So that's not to take anything away from Zendejas. It's more just like he had some type of Timothy Chandler curse put on him when he came to the national team. But Tom, like, for me, maybe Kevin Paredes and Gio Reyna or Malik Tillman are the better like left wing, right wing pairing, rather than playing an out of form Brendan Aronson, rather than playing an Alex Zendejas that hasn't looked good in a U.S. jersey. I think for me, Paredes left wing, Malik Tillman right wing is my preferred in the starting 11. What about you?
I agree, although I don't think Berhalter does. I think that's probably my.
What's he gonna do?
It's gonna be Paredes and Brendan Aronson. I think. I think I've been trying to game out the winger depth chart, and 1A and 1B are very clearly Pulisic and Weah. It's insane to think that they wouldn't be. But I think Brendan Aronson has gotten basically every single first off the bench minute available under Berhalter too, and Paredes has been coming in as second off the bench. So I think that they're pretty much the next men up right now, with Zendejas as a distance fourth. And we haven't seen Tillman healthy enough to know where he fits into that. And Berhalter has mentioned maybe you throw Paxton Aronson in there as a winger too. So I would just like to see Tillman just to see what he can do out there. He's done it before for club. We've seen him in Scotland. Like, he can clearly do that role.
He scored for PSV this weekend.
Yeah.
Assisted by Serginho Dest, by the way. But yeah, like, Paxton Aronson is listed as midfielder here. But I also thought interesting in the press conference after the roster release, Gregg didn't say he was like Christian Pulisic, but he said the U.S. staff sees Paxton Aronson as a similar player to Pulisic in the sense that he's a winger that likes to get into the box late, arrive late, and find the dangerous balls to score. So I know there was like kind of a quote out of context that said we see Paxton Aronson the same as Christian Pulisic. I don't think that's necessarily what he was talking about. Hearing that real time, what he really was saying is that Paxton Aronson is a player that likes to arrive late in the box and find those dangerous balls. So you're right, we might see Paxton Aronson in a winger role. And as light as we are in the step chart, there is consensus around Timothy Weah and Christian Pulisic being 1A and 1B. I would be very surprised if there's any consensus between the fan base and Gregg Berhalter and the fan base with the fan base of who 2A and 2B are.
Yeah. No, I think right now in Berhalter's mind it's Brendan Aronson and Kevin Paredes, but Brendan Aronson's incumbency status is only going to go so far when you're getting 10 minutes a game in Europe. Like, Berlin has been
and
awful.
Not good minutes.
No, Berlin has been so bad this year. Like, this is we cannot overstate how bad this season is going for them and Aronson specifically.
and it's not like, for me, it's nice that he's on a team in Europe in the Champions League. He's getting some minutes here and there. He's, if he didn't have the season that he had at Leeds the previous year, I'd feel so much better about where he is in his development. And I don't know if you remember this. This is probably like 18 months ago. But I remember a podcast that we did where I was talking about how Brendan Aronson, at every step of the way from the Union to Salzburg and then getting to Leeds, he has always surprised me in just his ability to raise his level and like prove everyone wrong. I feel like that hasn't necessarily regressed, because I don't know if he's a very different player than he was 18 months ago, but he has kind of failed some of the tests in terms of like getting to the next level and continuing that ascendancy that he was on such like a high with. So yeah, it is definitely concerning to me with Brendan Aronson for what he's done this season, but also that Leeds season can't really be overlooked for what it means in the full scope of his career and development.
Yeah, I think that Brendan Aronson has just got to find a way to put some balls in the back of the net in Europe at all. He's only scored, one professional goal since leaving Salzburg?
It
maybe
was very early on
he
in the
was.
Leeds.
Yeah, he stole the ball off of Mendy's foot and put it in, and that's the only goal he scored in the last 2 seasons. Like he's
That that Leeds Chelsea game will forever live in infamy for
the
American fans.
most fool's gold game that we've ever seen.
Seriously, I think at that point Leeds were like two wins in 2 games. They were second or third in the table. Jesse Marsch just crushed Chelsea at Chelsea 3-0, and everyone was flying high. And then you know the rest of the story. I'm not even going to mention it.
Don't even want to go back to know what our reaction to that game was, because I guarantee you we said some stuff that has aged poorly.
Yeah. Hopefully I've unlisted it from the podcast at this point. Yeah. So Tom, rounding out this lineup and this roster and the step chart, we have, I mean, speaking of 1A and 1B, Ricardo Pepi and Fuller and Balogun at striker. This is the most confident I've been in our number nines in our striker core that I've been in a long time. How are you feeling about Ricardo Pepi and Fuller and Balogun? And we know Balogun is kind of like a much more bright star in the sky, I would say, for where he is and the goals that he scored in Europe so far. But Ricardo Pepi, I mean, he's kind of the person that I thought Aronson would be.
Yeah.
Like he really has crushed at every single like test that he's had to get to the next level. And he would be playing a lot more minutes for PSV if Luc de Jong, their captain, wasn't also the number 9 and a Dutch legend on the team. So what do you see in our striker core? What are your thoughts on this?
It's 1B, 1B, and then 1A, 1B, and then just a hat of everyone else behind them who's just, a giant shrug. We've not seen any of them yet. I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen any of them yet under Berhalter too. I'm kind of wondering who the next name up is when we eventually do see the third name. But as far as Pepi and Balogun go, it's almost the perfect 1-2 punch. Balogun is so good at getting in behind and making striker runs. And Pepi is he's got that, that rare ability to just always overperform your XG that, we've talked about before is such a rare thing in strikers, but he just sort of seems to make the most of every single chance, no matter how ridiculously stupid hard it is. So, he's a great guy to have coming off the bench for Balogun, who I think is probably the starter going forward until he gives reason for Pepi to pass him. So I do think I want to see this window, though. Balogun makes these great runs all the time. And with the exception of the Ghana game, we have never hit those runs. And I want to see Gio Reyna, Malik Tillman, whatever winger group we throw at the wall and see what sticks. I want to see them start to play him in behind and spring him in, because we could be scoring a lot more goals if we just did that. Yeah.
What do you think his thoughts are going to be when he steps onto the field in Trinidad? A striker that grew up in the Arsenal Academy, has scored goals for big clubs. He scored Europa League goals for Arsenal. He's at Monaco now, competing with Ben Yedder, one of the better French forwards, no matter his domestic violence record. What do you think is going to go through Fuller and Balogun's mind when he steps into a real CONCACAF match?
I cannot wait to see what that's like, because it's going to be a rude awakening. At least it's not being played in Vancouver or whatever it is where we played the infamous game. We are going to the typical Trinidad and Tobago stadium, which is not being renovated. I think it's Port-au-Prince. But it's going to be an experience unlike anything he's ever had before, which will be fun.
Shades of Gio Reyna cringing at the fireworks in Honduras.
El Salvador, but yes, it's going to be...
El Salvador, yes.
It's going to be a little bit like... Except Central America is a different beast than the Caribbean. The Caribbean, you don't really have the really rabid fans and the, insane
it's
stadium.
It's more about the field conditions.
It's about the fact that you're playing on a beach, essentially.
In a cricket stadium.
Yeah, the fans, all like 500 of them, are like, a mile away from you with a track around the field, and, you're having to be ferried over a pool of water to get onto the field to warm up. It's going to be fun, but... Yeah, I love these CONCACAF away matches. They're some of my favorite parts of following the U.S. men's national team.
Me too. I am glad though that we have the home match first. We can maybe run up the score a little bit and take it a little bit easier when we go on to whatever that pitch looks like in Port-au-Prince in Trinidad and Tobago. Um, Tom, let's talk about our starting 11s. I mean, Matt Turner, pretty much locked in
Yeah.
starting goalkeeper. What's your back line here?
I have Robinson, Ream, Richards, and Dest.
Okay.
I
No Miles Robinson,
No
though.
Miles Robinson. I've got my two best passing center backs in there. I've got Richards, who's the athletic, speedy one who can cover the line. Ream, who can step up into the midfield and play some balls to break down what I assume is going to be basically a line of 11 in front of the goal.
Anyone that's ever been talking about how Tom is not objective and is a homer to his Atlanta United players and the MLS players, take a look at that back line as proof that he is a goddamn genius. Tom, midfield is also up in the air. Like, do we play with the six? Do we play with the double pivot? Is Johnny in that double pivot? Is it Yunus Musa and Weston McKennie? I personally have Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, and Gio Reyna as the three in my midfield. Who are yours?
I agree. I have McKennie, Musa, Reyna. I have Musa playing more centrally, almost like a sort of hybrid 6-8. I have McKennie sort of playing a little bit more advanced, and Reyna basically playing with the front line.
I mean, we haven't done this a ton with Gregg Berhalter, but I thought when we could have run with like a midfield of Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and Gio Reyna, you can kind of do like a strict 6-8-10
Yeah.
setup where you have one player that's, you know, breaking up passes, breaking up counterattacks. You have the 8 that's kind of more box to box. That's Weston McKennie. Then you have Gio Reyna, who's a little bit more creative and allowed to flow throughout the game. But again, this is Gregg Berhalter we're talking about. He's just started to wade into the waters of having a 10 on the pitch. So I agree with that. And then across the front three, does Greg agree with us that Kevin Paredes is next up, or do you think he goes with Brendan Aronson here?
I have Berhalter's 3 as being Paredes, Balogun, and Brendan Aronson. I think I would rather see it be Paredes, Balogun, and Malik Tillman with Brendan Aronson first off the bench.
I completely agree with your assessment and not what we expect Gregg Berhalter to do. What I like about that too is that Malik Tillman and Gio Reyna, I think, are better creative attackers in the center of the pitch. But if you have both of them on the field at the same time and one of them is playing off the right, they can kind of interchange when they need to.
Yeah.
They can lose their defender, they can lose their mark. And I think that sets us really nicely where, as if you have Brendan Aronson, I feel like he's not necessarily the same type of player, although he has played as kind of an 8-10 for us in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like he sticks a little bit more to his position. So with that starting 11, with the one that we've laid out for you, what is your expectation for these games against Trinidad and Tobago to qualify for the Copa America next year?
I expect it to be, camped out on the edge of their box, just sort of breaking them down, scoring goals the entire time. I kind of want to see us play the old Berhalter front 5 attacking style. I don't know if we've talked about it before on here, but if we're going to run Tillman, I would like to see Anthony Robinson kind of playing as like an outside left wing with Tillman, Balogun, and Reyna across the front, like 3, and then Paredes wide right, and then McKennie, Musa, and Dest is like your midfield 3 shuttling the ball around. I've got it set up very, very attacking here on my notes.
For as much shtick as Gregg Berhalter gets for his in-game management, I mean, that is essentially the formation that Arsenal and Manchester City play now, is having those two center backs and pushing everyone up forward, where you're almost playing like a 2-2-3-3.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that checks out. Like a 2-2-3-3 where your fullbacks are really high up the pitch. They're supporting the attack. And especially when you expect to have a lot of the ball, which we will in this game, I think that can work out really nicely for us. Serginho Dest especially just is in such great form. And the triumvirate of PSV players, I mean, again, 12 wins in 12 matches. Malik Tillman and Serginho Dest have been getting plenty of playing time. Ricardo Pepi, I'd love to see him, but I do agree with you. I think Fuller and Balogun is going to be the starter for the U.S. and probably deserves to be a little bit more than Ricardo Pepi at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good team, and it's going to be fun to watch. This is not a game that I expect to be close, and so these games where you put in a billion goals and you get to see the guys really just having fun, they're a good time.
Yeah, man. All right. Thursday night, the U.S. versus Trinidad and Tobago in Austin, Texas. Lots of other stuff going on in the U.S. soccer verse. The U17s won their first match against South Korea 3-1. This morning, a 15-year-old from Charlotte FC had a brace.
Youngest
What
player since
else?
Freddie Adu to represent the U.S. at the U17s. Crazy.
Hey, man, don't jinx this guy. Please don't jinx this guy. Um, I watched that full game. He honestly reminded me of he reminded me of a forward that played like Darlington Nagbe. Like his first touch and his tight dribbling in defender's space was awesome to see. And yeah, I had never heard of him before this
Yeah,
game, but
I can't wait to see him in person next year when Chattanooga FC inevitably goes to MLS Next Pro and gets to play a lot of these really young, talented MLS players. Um,
there you go.
but yeah, I think that the comparison to Darlington Nagbe is funny for a player who scored 2 goals. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Darlington Nagbe heat nap meme, where in the middle of the third of the field, he is literally Iniesta, and then the closer you get to goal, the more horrible he gets.
I will never forget his Portland Timbers volley goal, and that's how I will choose to remember.
Oh, he's amazing. As long as you
Maybe
don't put him into the
ignorantly.
box, he'll
Yeah,
the
true.
2020 MLS Cup goal where he volleyed the ball to himself and then hit a volley from like 35 yards to score. He's amazing and he's out
Yeah,
far. It's
not in the
just
box.
not just don't put him anywhere near the 18.
Yeah, yeah. There we go. Well, maybe if a Darlington Nagbe regen could also shoot in the box and played a little bit further forward, I mean, that'd be a pretty damn good player.
That would be
Wouldn't you agree?
it'd be an amazing player. That player would be $50 million midfielder.
What's your last word, Tom? What do you have to say to the people?
uh, um, MLS playoffs are going on right now, and whatever you feel about the format, it's been really fun to watch. Hope that you get some time to enjoy it. Enjoy the last little bit of local soccer we got for the year, and hope you guys, holidays are coming up. Hope you guys enjoy your time. I'm going to be grinding a lot, but enjoy always, coming back to talk about U.S. soccer, and hope I get some time out of the grind to keep doing it.
We've all missed you watching this, and I've missed you, Tom. Thank you for continuing the It's Called Soccer tradition of blipping on the radar every 4 or 5 weeks to get together and talk about U.S. soccer. The one other thing I do want to say, the NWSL championship was last night. It was Ali Krieger versus Megan Rapinoe in both of their last games. Sadly, Megan Rapinoe tore her Achilles 6 minutes in, and Gotham took it 2-1. It was an insane game, crazy game. At the very end of the match, the Gotham FC goalkeeper got a red card for a handball outside the box. Gotham had already used substitutes in 3 different changes, so they had to put a field player in goal. Last minute of the game, you have Rose Lavelle taking a free kick. I mean, it was just insane. Gotham held on to win it, and Ali Krieger goes out a champion in her last match. Amazing, amazing final, and shout out to those 2 legends of U.S. soccer. Very sad in the way that had to end for Megan Rapinoe. I mean, she deserved a little bit better in that last match. And I would have loved to see a full power OL Reign take on a full power Gotham, but wasn't meant to be. Ali Krieger, NWSL champion, W League champion, Europe Champions League champion, and 2-time World Cup champion. What a career that is. Shout out to Ali Krieger.
Career. Wow.
Insane. All right. That is our episode of It's Called Soccer. I am sure we will be back after the games against Trinidad and Tobago to go over them, review, and react to those. Until next time, we will see you on It's Called Soccer. Peace.